Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of The Perfect 10. The Perfect 10 is my 10-week series that I'm running on future skills. So the top 10 skills that I believe organizations have to develop now and in the future in order for the organization and its people to thrive. I am Marilise de Villiers. I'm a performance coach, best-selling author and cybersecurity, people and change consultant. So the Perfect 10 is on my YouTube channel called Your Bullyproof Life. And this is where we talk about all things workplace culture related, and in particular, toxic workplaces. So how do we tackle toxic behaviors in the workplace and create safe and inclusive environments where everybody can thrive, where everybody can show up at their best every day? How do we create those high-performing cultures that all organizations so desperately need in today's changing and very turbulent environment? So we're already in week 9 of the Perfect 10 series. So this week is top skill number 9 and it's influence. So what does it take to become incredibly influential in your relationships and your career? I'm so passionate about this topic and I write about it in my book Raw, How to Tame the Bully Inside and Out. The chapter is called Raw and it communicates with impact and influence. So Raw is also a 4-step process for how to deal with difficult conversations. So it helps you to navigate situations where you've got to overcome conflicts, disagreements, and you've got to negotiate to a point where you achieve a win-win outcome for all the parties involved in the conversation. So influence for me is absolutely, crucial. It's absolutely everything in how we show up every day, how we engage with others, and really focus on how we build amazing relationships through how we influence others and influence ourselves, because we have to also look at how we talk to ourselves. What is that sort of, conversation that's going on in our heads? How are we influencing our own mindset, how we think, how we feel, what we say and what we do? Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by 2 incredible influencers in their own right, Louise Cartwright and Robert Coles. So let me tell you a little bit about each of them. Louise works to transform small business owners into 6-figure CEOs so they can live a life of financial, time and location freedom. In her past life, Louise was an overweight, depressed single parent claiming benefits and insubstantial debt. Using the tools she now shares with her clients, Louise turned it around to become a 6-time triathlete, mindset expert, international coach, and speaker. It is her passion to help others redefine their identity and create their rich life. Robert Coles is the director of Cumberland House Consulting Limited, specializing in cybersecurity strategy, program delivery, and non-exec and board advisory roles. He is also an honorary professor at UCL and visiting professor at Royal Holloway, University of London. Robert has over 30 years of cybersecurity experience and has held a number of Chief Information Security Officer positions, including for the NHS, GSK, National Grid, and Merrill Lynch. Robert has extensive links with major industry information security networking groups and government security agencies. He was awarded a PhD in psychology by the University of Leeds for his work on the perceptions of information and IT risk, and has published and presented on this and other topics. So as you can see, 2 incredible influencers who I'm now going to have the delight of speaking to. So as every week, I'm going to hop over to Zoom now to have a chat with Louise and Robert. I hope you enjoy it. Hello, Robert and Louise, and welcome to this is episode 9 already of my 10-week series. I cannot believe it's gone so quickly. But yeah, today we're talking about influence, and I'm really delighted and honored to have both of you join me. So I'm going to kick us off with a very light-hearted question, just to warm us up. So curious to know an interesting fact about you both. So Louise, let's start with you.
Okay, so I was thinking about this, and I was like, I don't really know, but I guess that I trained to be a midwife for a while, which kind of surprises a lot of people because it's a little bit off tangent to a lot of other things that I've done. And the reason that I didn't actually stay on and become a qualified midwife was that when I saw my first live birth, it was the most horrific thing I'd ever seen. And I said, I don't ever want to see that again. And like within weeks, I'd said, like, not for me. I'd left university and chosen to do something else instead. So it was a very short visit, but it was one of those things that reminded me what I really didn't want to do in life.
That's good. Test everything and keep the the good stuff.
Absolutely.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing, Robert.
So that is such a coincidence because the fact about me was that I studied to become a doctor. I went to university to study medicine. So I've dissected a human body. I was absolutely rubbish at it and I got thrown out. And much like Fatima, the ballet dancer, I was about to have a career in cyber and I didn't even know it.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
That is a coincidence, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Crazy.
There is no such thing as a coincidence, Louise. We know that, don't we?
We do know that.
Oh, no, let's not get deep so soon in the conversation, right? So what does influence mean to you? And, why is it such an important skill? So to you personally.
Well, I'll go first, shall I?
Go on, Robert. No, after you.
All right.
After you.
So for me, I think of it as the ability to cause an effect on someone. I mean, the effect might be to change their behavior. It might affect their mood or their state of mind. But it's about, I guess, persuasion, subtle persuasion. Appealing to people's rationality, their logic, but also their emotions. And what it's not is, commanding and ordering. So an army general can order troops to go into the war, but he won't win their hearts and minds in doing so. And therefore, if they just take an order, then they won't be giving their all. If he wins their hearts and minds, then they'll give much more.
Ooh, I kind of love that.
That's amazing. Yeah.
That was wrapped up beautifully. I should have done my homework a bit better. Very similar to what you said, Robert, in terms of causing that effect on someone. So I wrote down here that first of all it's about being sort of that conduit for different possibilities, because somebody else is with their model of the world might not notice that, and so if you can create a possibility for somebody else in respect of having a positive impact. So Robert said about causing an effect, and we know that influence can be positive and negative. I like to go on to the positive side of it, so making that positive impact. And also influence to me really is about being the person that practices what they preach. So because, like if you want to have that impact, like you said, on winning their hearts and minds, they need to see that you're the person that believes so wholeheartedly in what you're saying that you're already doing it.
Absolutely. And let's just think about someone that is incredibly influential in your life today. What is that, or who is that person, and what makes them so influential?
I'll let you go, Robert.
Well, I guess many people. I take influence from many people. I take influence from my parents, from my husband. He just tells me what to do, so I think that's more power. But if he really wants me to get to do something, then he does it subtly. he knows he has to be subtle rather than just tell me. I think probably in a work context, the biggest, the person I learned the most from was a guy called Jack McNamara, who was one of the leaders at Merrill Lynch. And he wasn't actually my boss. He was American, but he just behaved as though he was my boss and included me in his leadership team. I learned a huge amount from him. He was He was a really good leader. He was likable, empathetic. He'd always, it felt like he was talking directly to you, even though he'd be addressing a large number of people. He was trusted. He was, he had a very good track record. He was great at stakeholder management. And he never told you directly what to do. He set a framework and he taught you how to think through things within that framework, but he let you come up with the answer, and then he held you accountable for the delivery of that answer. So he wasn't directive in the sense of he knew all the answers. He knew he didn't have all the answers. And he got the team to come up with the answers collectively. And then he held us to account. And he taught me how to think strategically. Merrill Lynch was the first real strategy that I'd come up with, which was a long-term 3-year strategy. And I've used that way of thinking in all of the jobs I've had since then.
Amazing.
That's incredible. And I think we're going to come on to, I'm going to ask Louise to share with us the framework for, the sort of top 3 things that the world's best influencers do. And you've just hit one of them, and you probably hit all of them, but one that sort of I heard was they teach you how to think. So you obviously said to teach you how to think strategically, but that was necessary for you in your role at the time, so yeah. I think it's incredibly, it's just so powerful. And you've just described to me what I've heard, just the ultimate role model, and I think it's incredibly powerful if someone can speak to a crowd, but it feels like they're speaking directly with you. There's something that they do. It's that sort of fully engaged, fully present, I think that's probably, it's a real skill. Louise, you?
This is a really challenging question, because I feel like when we ask that, like Robert said about his parents, and that, I felt like I should be going back and saying, oh, my grandma or my dad or whatever. But actually, if I'm really honest, I think I didn't really understand influence at all until a few years ago. So now looking back, I can say that the first person that I really started to take influence from was Brendan Burchard. Finding that book, Motivation Manifesto, literally opened my whole world to a new way of thinking. And when you suddenly realize that you're in control of what you think and therefore your reality, you've got to the age of 40, you didn't know that, that's quite a revelation. And now where I'm at now, I think 2 people that are really influencing me. One is my dad. Obviously, like my dad's got incurable cancer. So he is an absolute legend for me. And he right now is reminding me what's important in my life and maintaining my values. So he's a massive influence. He doesn't even know it. And my eldest daughter is influential for a very different reason, because the challenge that I'm having with her right now, she's just approaching 21. We have a very challenging relationship, but what she's teaching me is the value of understanding how our past traumas can follow us in adult life, and how to show more compassion and to, again, keep showing those possibilities for them and not reacting so much. So those 2 people are really, at this moment in time, massively guiding me and influencing me.
Thank you so much for sharing, Louise. I think I'm very much in that sort of learning from my children mode as well. And I keep thinking I'm very much in a nature versus nurture thing at the moment, because I keep thinking, what makes my 2 boys so differently? Why is the one such a, introvert, assured in himself, laid back little boy, and the other one just like me, feisty and emotional and speak before he thinks kind of child, just think it's so fascinating. But I think I love what you said about they're influencing you without even realizing they're influencing you. I think that's so powerful, so powerful. Wow, it's good stuff. Really good stuff. Thank you so much, both. So let's just flip it around to you and instances in your careers and in your life where you have felt incredibly influential over someone. What would be the sort of moment that stand out for you, where you feel like I'm really proud of this phase or this particular instance where I was incredibly influential? Robert?
Yeah. I think so. As a chief information security officer, you're accountable for the risk. I was accountable at GSK for the risk to the board. So I had to explain what the risks were and how we were managing the risks. And I had to demonstrate that even though we weren't where we wanted to be, we had a plan, we knew what we were doing, we knew how we were going to get there. And that's incredibly difficult when you have the accountability but not the responsibility. So I was the first CISO, and there'd always been an enterprise infrastructure team which ran networks and desktops and PCs and servers, and they had a security operations team. And that didn't report to me, that reported to the CIO, and I was the peer of the CIO. We both reported into the head of core business services. So I had to influence a team that didn't report to me, and I was accountable for their activity to the board, which was incredibly difficult. And I did a number of things. I've sort of reflected over the last few days, and the head of that team, or the head of one of the teams, was Adam Rayburn James, and he had a guy called John Wimber on his team who ran the security operations group. And I adopted much of the principles that I'd learned from Jack McNamara, actually. So I treated John like he was one of my direct reports, and I put him on my leadership team, even though he didn't report to me. I just, I treated him exactly the same as all of the rest of my direct reports. We danced around each other a bit initially because, they didn't trust me and they didn't know me, and they thought I was going to come in and swoop in and, transfer all the security operations folk. And I thought, well, that's not really what I wanted to do. And I right from the very first meeting, I socialized some of the things I wanted to do, and I just sort of tested out the waters a little bit. And I did things like I established a principle of supply and demand. And I said, look, you supply security through your security operations, through the network, through the PCs, through the servers. And I create the demand for that. And I create the demand for the change and improving all of that. And you supply it to me. And that seemed to go down pretty well. And then the second thing I did was I went through a process of creating the strategy. I did some benchmarking, so we had some data to compare, to demonstrate that we hadn't invested as much as other large complex organizations in security. So that was quite good for, establishing the demand for improvement. Then I ran a whole series of workshops, about 33 workshops with business people, and I made sure that the IT security operations folk attended every single one of those workshops so that they could input into the whole process. And then we ran a big 3-day workshop with about 80 people, about half of which were from the security operations. We went through, we established what the risks were, and and everybody inputted into the ideas they had for how we could improve the controls, how we could manage the risks better. So it really felt like a really good collaborative effort. So it wasn't me just imposing this on IT. It was really, it was a real collaborative effort across the whole business and including IT throughout. And it was super effective. And then I put Adam onto my governance group, so he could have a veto effectively on anything that I did. So if he didn't like whatever I was doing, he had the ability to be able to veto it, and he could vote down and say, no, I don't want you to do that. And we did, we did disagree. We did have occasions when there was a bit of give and take on both sides, and we disagreed, and and sometimes he won the argument and sometimes I won the argument. But there was enough mutual trust there to know that we both had a perspective, and we were both wanting the best for GSK, and there might be two different ways of achieving that best, but we both had a forum and an ability to be able to articulate that. So it turned out to be one of the best, it could have been one of the worst relationships. We could have been at absolute loggerheads because we didn't report to the same person, and we were, we had different lines of report. But actually it turned out to be the most collaborative and the best, the best working relationship I think I've developed throughout my entire career.
And I think that can only happen when you put the egos to one side and you both work towards mutual kind of outcomes, what's best for the company, what's best for GSK. And, you sort of put your pride, your ego to the side, because I think often that's where the relationships get really difficult, you know, potentially sometimes quite toxic, is when we just seem to be in it for our own gain and not necessarily looking at the bigger picture and the outcome we're trying to achieve. Louise, you've been incredibly influential over me, so that's a good start.
Thank you. But, you know, I love what Robert said there about like both wanting the best, and there are different ways to get there. I think that's so important in influence, particularly like Marilise, you and I were talking about when it comes to, well, actually, Robert, you know, husbands, partners, children. It's very easy for us to get sort of caught up in what we think is right, but actually what's the benefit for everybody, and what are the different pathways that we can make that happen. And I feel really blessed actually that I get to do this just every day with my work with clients. But one of the things that I learned from the CHPC was like, how can I do this on a regular basis? Not necessarily just not going out and trying to just coach anybody that I find, but dropping it into conversation. And I've been doing some ideal client questionnaires with people and getting on calls with people to listen to their language. And the lady that I spoke to yesterday, we've worked together in the past, and you know, I kept hearing the same kind of comments coming up over and over again, very closing down statements. I can't, I don't know how, la la la. So I just said to her, and there was a lot for her around, she couldn't build her business because she didn't know how to message. She didn't know how to speak to her ideal clients. So what I asked her to do is I asked her to go back down her timeline about 3 years and tell me about where she was 3 years ago. How did she feel? And I felt quite bad actually, because the poor woman started crying. But as she's talking to me, I'm writing down everything that she's saying. And then when we finished, I read it back and I said, does that sound like somebody who might need help? And do you think there's people out there right now that need you to extend your hand to say, that, you know, I see you, I hear you, and there is a pathway for you to get out? And it was just there was several times in the conversation, she said, I just never seen it like that before. And it only takes that one little sort of, you know, change that vantage point just a tiny bit, and a whole new possibility opens up for someone. And so now I know that she can get off that call. I said to her, I'll send all the words over that you used. She'll now have plenty of language that she can use on social media. And more importantly, she's reattached to herself why that meaning is so important to her and why she needs to help these other people. And that was just like in a 20-minute conversation. So I'm really blessed that I'm able to do that a lot. Wow. And I think we all do it without, you know, what Robert was saying there is just, it's that intention of how you want somebody else to feel as well when they've been around you. I think that's so important.
And people, I think it's important to have empathy as well. Actually, you know, if you can imagine how what you're saying would be received, if you can put yourself in that person's shoes and hear yourself and hear how that might be, how what you say might affect somebody, you know, that's so important.
Well, I mean, my parents always used to say, it's not what you say, dear, it's the way that you say it. And at the time, I remember going, yeah, you know, but it is so true, isn't it? Because the words that come out, we're wired as human beings to pick up on incongruency, right? So if what comes out of your mouth isn't matching what your body's telling me, I'm going to take your body and not your verbiage. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I was just about to say there that Maya Angelou has that famous quote as well, where she's like, people won't remember what you said, what you did, but they do remember how you make them feel. Absolutely. So yeah, I think empathy is actually the first skill that I covered. I think, you know, for me in this series, I started with empathy because it felt like that's the overriding skill that applies to absolutely everything, you know, as you say, Robert, that ability to put yourself in other people's shoes. And I love that sort of vantage point. Sometimes it is like you say, Louise, just that little shift that you've got to make to see things completely differently. You know, so perspectives so important. Yeah, so just want to say to my viewers, if you've missed the previous sessions of the Perfect 10, they're all on my YouTube channel, so you just go back. And empathy, as I say, was the first one. It was a fantastic session with Ed and Mimi, and you'll just find so much good stuff in there as well. Right, so to come back to the conversation, I wanted to sort of pick up a little bit more on, the model and the frameworks, Louise, that we teach. So you said CHPC earlier. So that's a certified high performance coach. So Louise and I, Robert, just for your benefit and for our viewers' benefits, we've qualified with Brendan Bouchard. So the same person Louise said in the beginning that sort of really influenced her at the start of her journey. So we work as part of the community, High Performance Institute community. So we all teach the same curriculum, and influence is so key. It's a critical component of that curriculum. So we spend a lot of work on deep work on influence. So I wanted Louise just to sort of share, what the world's most influential people do. So they all have three things in common. And I want you to sort of listen out, because I think we've mentioned most of those already in this conversation, but it's just a nice wrapper for people to be able to structure their thinking, So Louise, why don't you do us the honors?
I'll take the spotlight, shall I? Yes, so you touched on it earlier when Robert was automatically doing it without necessarily knowing what he was doing, and that is that they teach us how to think. And I think what's important to note on that is, and again, I'm going to go back to something that Robert said, is that the leaders and the influencers don't necessarily say, I know exactly how, right? They've got a framework, but they're also open to, I think, Robert, you said something about like collectively getting the answers. And, not saying I'm up here as your guru, but, challenging you to, or teaching you how to think in a different way. And why that's really important to me is that I used to have this real limiting belief around, I'd never been in corporate. I'd never had a real job. I'd been a single parent. I'd claimed benefits. I was a bit of I think my parents used to say, like, I was a bit of a fly by the night. I just did things as and when. And so when I started my own business, that it weighed on my mind a lot. Like, I wasn't clever enough. I didn't have a degree, yada, yada, yada. And as I've done more and more of this work, it's like we create this city in our mind where everything fits into one of the buildings or the pathways, and we're like little mice and we keep running around in this city. And to create that new reality, we've got to bulldoze the city and rebuild it with thoughts and actions that guide us to where we want to go. And so that teaching them, helping people to think, is about breaking their conditioning so they can choose what to think to serve the outcome that they want to get. And that, again, that comes into that empathy. Like, if you're going to have empathy where somebody else is at, influencers will meet people where they are. They will not try and meet them where we're at, right? It's not about coming down to their levels. We can, even when we do that language, we tend to say coming down. It's just meeting them wherever they might happen to be. So that teaching to think is just what I talk about, opening up those portals of possibility for something different. And then we move into like challenging them, right? It's so much more. There's that story about the dog sitting on the nail, and it's more comfortable to sit in the pain of being on the nail than to get off and not know what's on the other side. So when we challenge people, it's not to say that what you're doing is wrong, but hey, like, have you thought about what would it look like if, what are you prepared to do? That, I think, can be the hardest part, because it's about how we frame that and how we deliver it. And again, if we're meeting them where they're at, we have to know where that challenge point needs to be. I think that's the problem. When you've done so much work yourself, it's easy, Marilyn, I know you know this, it's easy to go, yeah, you can totally do that. Have you thought about this? And this person's running in the opposite direction because right now they're 200 steps behind. So that challenging them is a way that empowers them rather than makes them feel that they're never going to get there.
Louise,
and the most important.
Can I just jump in there? Because I think, again, Robert said this earlier about the challenge. So not necessarily agreeing always on something, but it's that sort of challenge and support. So I always talk about the high challenge, high support model, because I think and especially in cybersecurity, what I've seen a lot is the high challenge, low support, so it's getting that balance right, because you need kind of both in equal measure. So yes, you've got to really challenge people, but you've also got to be that support person. And I think that balance is incredibly important. Robert, I don't know if you've got any views on that.
Yeah, I guess, it's almost like coaching, isn't it? You know, if you're a good coach, then you know you can encourage people to think in a certain way. You can. It's a style of getting people to think through problems themselves and coming up with the answers without being directive or coercive or telling people what to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's what you said earlier on as well. Sorry, about persuasion. You know, it's positive persuasion. It's and you know, you said something sort of about the leader, like not dictating. You know, getting people in to achieve the common goal. And when it comes to the challenging as well, like you said, Marilise, so much of that support is helping people to believe that it's possible for them.
Yeah.
You know, even if it's going to be challenging, you know, it's completely possible for you. That's certainly something that I have found. So I love that whole, you know, high challenge, but you know, give them the support at the same time.
Absolutely,
I love that.
Right, so let's come back to your third, the one that's the most important one. Yes.
Yes, role model the way. And again, this comes to that congruency. You know, you can't. I put on my LinkedIn. One of my best posts on LinkedIn was, you know, leadership is not a job title; it's a way of living. And you know, role modeling the way, you can't tell people to do things that you're not prepared to do yourself. And again, it's not about saying you have all the answers, but you're certainly walking that talk, because it's that transparency. And certainly now, where there's so much social media and we're being watched all the time, whether we know it or not, if you're saying one thing and doing another, it dilutes your influence. It creates discrepancy, and that stuff that's gonna follow you around. So role modeling the way is really important, massively important when it comes to influence, because you can do the other two, but if you're doing the opposite of what you're teaching, then you've lost already.
Yeah, I completely agree. If I think back to the example I gave earlier of Jack McNamara at Merrill Lynch, you know, I wanted to copy him. I wanted to do the things he was doing. He was such a great leader. I wanted to be like him.
And can I just ask, like, when he sounds like an amazing guy, and was there something very energetic about him as well? I know you said you felt like he was speaking to you, even if he was speaking to a room, but I'm always fascinated by, like, when people walk into a room, you know, the energy that they give off. I'll just a little example, like the place where my husband works, there's 4 guys and they're all the same height, but when you see them together, they all look different because of the energy they come into the room with. It's crazy.
Absolutely. So he would command a room. He would walk into a room and he would command the room. You know, he had the ability to be able to completely change the dynamic within a room just by walking around and talking to people.
Love that.
And that comes from your inner belief, you know, your inner strength, your inner self. You know, you cannot just fabricate that stuff. So he must have been so connected with who he was, you know, his purpose. And really just the impact, you know, the contribution that he wanted to make, you know, in terms of his role, you know, what he was there to do. So yeah, it's incredible. I think this is the whole energy dynamic is very fascinating, as you say, Louise. Love that. We're always running out of time as we just warm up, and then it's sort of, you know, we're already sort of half an hour in, and I've sort of try and keep these manageable for the viewers, you know. But are there any sort of final thoughts, you know, that you want to share? Well, maybe first of all, let's just before we do the final thoughts, any particular resources, you know, on the topic of influence that you would recommend our viewers to explore? There's so many.
There are. I mean, I go back time and time again to Brendan's High Performance Habits books, because although influence is only a part of that, it feeds into the takeaway, which I'll give you at the end. But it kind of, you can apply everything in that book, and it will automatically, in my opinion, increase the influence that you have in your life and on yourself. So that, for me, that's anybody that wants to change your life, that's a no-brainer to read that book.
Okay. Yeah, I can certainly vouch for that. I've read it 3 times now. Keep going back to it. Robert, you?
I, as I said, really, I don't know the frameworks and the resources available, so I can't really recommend anything. You know,
I think it's probably, if you think about, I mean, just leadership, you know, and I mean, all the amazing leadership books out there. There's one that I've recently seen, which I haven't read, I have to confess, but it was recommended by David Lansfield on LinkedIn. It's called The 3D Leader. So I'm really curious to know what that book, but I suspect it will have lots of good stuff about, you know, how you influence people. So I'm definitely gonna check that out. So yeah, I would sort of just maybe throw that one into the mix.
Mm-hmm.
Final takeaway, Louise?
I'm going to say that the biggest influence you need to have is on yourself. The way, literally, in everything that you do, because I think lots of people, and we spoke about this before you started recording, and lots of people are very influential without even knowing it. And just because of the way that they show up, and social media is a classic example for that. You've only got to see somebody who does a random act of kindness, or is on a fitness journey, or changes their life, and people are inspired by that act. So when you inspire yourself by the way that you show up every day, and you know, the commitment that you have to being intentional in your relationships and in your conversations, and how you look after your health and all that kind of stuff, you naturally elevate your influence. So I would say focus on yourself first, and the rest will follow.
Fabulous, thank you.
I guess from me, you know, to reinforce one of those points, you know, all of this is bound up in psychology and how we perceive the world, and you know, we perceive the world through a number of filters, and you know, influence is all about, you know, people copy people who are successful. If you want to be successful, you copy other people who are successful. So we have a propensity to follow, and you know, and also one of those other psychological truisms, you know, we want to be part of the in crowd. You know, you don't want to be the outsider. So we all have a natural propensity to be influenced, and you know, influencers, I think, you know, subconsciously take advantage of that to persuade people to do things.
Thank you. Thank you so much both for joining me today. I've really enjoyed the discussion, and yeah, it's just getting amazing. Like every week, it's just, I learned so much, and really enjoyed and really appreciate you both joining me today. So thank you, Robert, and thank you, Louise.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.